Thank you for the welcome. It's wonderful to see so many feminists gathered together in one place. Some people have said that feminism has gone away. We now live in a post-feminist era. It's dead, it's over. Other people tell us that feminism has been co-opted, seduced by neoliberalism, resignified by neoliberalism, as people like Fraser would say. And then I come here. They're wrong to say feminism has gone away. Feminism has a future and is important for everybody. The next challenge is the crisis. The crisis hasn't gone away. It hasn't been cured. The crisis, which started in 2007, was caused by the failure to democratically regulate finance. After the Great Crash of 1929, which led to the Great Depression of the 1930s, to fascism in Central Europe, to the Holocaust and World Wars, by 1944, we had the Bretton Woods settlement, which controlled capital. For the first time, we had international agreements to control capital. The neoliberal project in the mid-1980s took off all of those regulations. Finance grew in an uncontrolled way and led to the current crisis. Our politicians are now attempting to blame the crisis on excessive welfare expenditure. They're wrong. The cause of the crisis is the failure to regulate finance capital. The cause of the crisis lies in a gendered neoliberal project which took away those democratic controls. As the crisis has been blamed on welfare expenditure, our politicians have argued that we should cut back on public expenditure. I sit in the UK. The UK did this from 2010, looking at Greece. Look at Eastern Europe, Southern Europe. They're welfare states which have so supported women, offered women income, offered care of the elderly, offered services to prevent violence against women, have all been cut back. This is relatively new to Europe. The rest of the world has already experienced this. Previous financial crashes led to the IMF leading to what they called a structural adjustment, that is, a tax on gendered welfare provision in other countries of the world, Latin America, East Asia. Well, now it's here. So what are we going to do about it? Some people say that we've now changed the regulation of finance. We've done little bits and pieces. I don't think we've done nearly enough. I think we're going to have another crash. 1 year? 5 years? Finance is still exceedingly unstable. Several countries within the EU have still got major problems with their deficits. I think another crash is coming. My question to us is, are we ready? Do we have a feminist agenda? We know that a crisis is a time of major restructuring. We've just seen it. Do we have a feminist agenda for the next crash? Are we ready? When they attempt to restructure the financial and fiscal architecture of the European Union, do we have feminist demands to put into it? Do we know what we want? Are we able to say how we think finance should be regulated in the interests of women and everybody else? That's my challenge. Can we do it? In order to do it, we have to think very hard about who our allies are, how we organize, how we construct that political agenda so that we're ready for the next crash. And this is a real challenge for feminism. In many countries, feminism is most powerful in its grassroots forms. That is, the informal, the spontaneous, the everyday sexism, campaigning. In a few places, feminism is slightly more organized. Very few places have managed to elect an MEP. The Nordic countries are unique. So, what are our challenges in organizing? How can we look at the big picture? How can we integrate the concerns that we have on immediate, everyday matters of everyday life and build them into organizations which are powerful enough to tackle finance capital, which otherwise has an agenda which will lead to the wrecking of our gendered welfare states? So what challenges? Sometimes feminism has constructed itself around issues of identity, and we've seen the fracturing of different groups focused upon an identity as a black feminist, as a working class feminist, a feminist from very different, very specific identities. And for a time in feminist politics, it was important that we did that. But if we're trying to build something larger, we have to go beyond those forms of identity politics. I think of this as building feminist projects, building a project which can go beyond those issues of identity politics. We have questions as to how to build alliances and coalitions. When we build alliances and coalitions, sometimes feminism becomes invisible. It's one of the reasons that people say there is no feminism anymore. Let me take an example. We have really big organizations which fight for better wages for women, which fight for maternity leave, parental leave, paternity rights, for rights for workers who are about to be sacked, for better conditions at work, for solidarity. They're often called trade unions. I'd like to call trade unions feminist organizations. I think trade unions are one of our biggest forms of mass feminist organization pursuing feminist goals. Lots of people in the academy in women's studies can't see the scale of feminism because they don't think of trade unions as part of the feminist movement. Maybe you think of them as an ally, but at the very least, they're part of a feminist project. In the context of the crisis, the trade unions have been important in their funding and support for feminist projects. Where I sit in the UK, the trade unions were important on funding the investigations into the cuts in the provision of services to stop violence against women. The TUC funded False Economy, which provided the data which enabled us in the academy to produce the statistics which showed that in 1 year, 31% of the budget for services to prevent violence against women were cut. And without the trade union support in that research, we wouldn't have been able to produce that kind of data. We need to build the alliances across a whole range of different forms of organizations, and thinking about the contestation of the financial crisis is one place to do that. So how do we describe it? Is it just the words of alliances and projects? I think we can have more imaginative terminology. I like the one of velvet triangle, in which we have grassroots feminists, academics, parliamentarians, civil servants, all coming together I realise that's more than 3, so it's more than a triangle. But it's still that notion of a set of alliances. But we also need knowledge, which is why you're all here. Creating communities between those who are producing new knowledge and those who are active on the ground so that we can think more constructively and more effectively as to how to act. I call that an epistemic community. You are my epistemic community. That is new knowledge and activism coming together. What else? In lots of countries, women have had difficulty in democracy. Sometimes democracy is thought of as simply you have it or you don't. You can vote and have parties, or you don't vote and you don't have democracy. I think it's more complicated than that, and that we should have a concept of deepening democracy so that we can include in that things like how open is the electoral system to having women elected, how many women are actually present in the parliamentary arenas, how expensive is it to stand for parliament? Is it so expensive that in practice women can't do this? How many institutions are governed democratically? So, for example, if we sell off our education systems and our nurseries, that's a practice of de-democratization. To deepen democracy, we need to take these things back under democratic control rather than these important gendered services being part of a private, undemocratic system. So we need to deepen democracy, and when democracy is deeper, then it makes it easier for everybody else to make contributions to that. Without a deep democratic structure, the grassroots movements have far less chance of doing anything effective. But we need to combine. Grassroots movements aren't enough to take on global finance capital. Individual countries can't do it. The UK government is too small to stand up to the finance capital in the City of London. Individual countries can't do this. I think the only polity which is big enough to do that is the European Union. European Union could have an agenda to regulate finance capital, to tax those financial flows, financial transactions tax, Tobin taxes. We could definancialize, reduce the scale and power of finance in our lives so that more matters are run by democratic decision-making rather than by finance. So we need an agenda at a European Union level so that when the next financial crisis comes, as I think it will, it's not just a set of bankers in Brussels or Frankfurt making the decisions about how to restructure the European economy at that crisis moment. We should have a feminist agenda out there so that we say full employment, not inflation, gender equality, which is an EU fundamental value written into all the banking agreements. If we're to have a new financial and fiscal settlement at the next round of the crisis, we should be writing that agenda, and we should be writing it now. So we should think big, and we should have everything, from the grassroots to the NGOs, to the political parties, to the European Union. We need feminist activism embedded in each of those institutional sites, with allies and coalitions with all of our allies, from trade unions to anti-racist organizations, all of the different organizations, in order that we're ready at the next crisis when I think our world will be restructured. And I hope that that restructuring will be a feminist restructuring. Thank you.